Hey guys, Michael here, co-founder of Studicata, having worked with and helped over 1,000 students prepare for the bar exam. One of the most common questions that we get from students who are just beginning their preparation for the bar exam is, how much of this is it going to take for me to pass? Everybody wants to know, how many hours do I need to spend studying to pass the bar exam? The typical response that you see to this from big prep companies, instructors, tutors, professors is somewhere between 500 to 600 hours. The way that this number is calculated is by saying, okay, well, bar prep needs to be a full-time job for 8 to 10 weeks. So if you figure full-time job is about 10 to 12 hours a day, you spend about 500 to 600 hours doing bar prep. To which my response is that this probably isn't the best way to calculate the amount of time that you need to spend studying to pass the bar exam. And I don't want to speak for anybody out there who's saying that, because what I think they're trying to do is come up with a general, all-encompassing, broad, one-size-fits-all answer to a complex question. Unfortunately, I think that, that's probably not the best way to look at it. And my response to this question is that it's really not about the amount of hours that you spend studying, it's about the quality of your preparation, right? Because I'm gonna spend my 500 to 600 hours very differently than you might spend your 500 to 600 hours. You might spend it very differently than the next guy, right? It's such a dynamic variable, right? No constant, the amount of hours. And really, what is an hour of studying? What if you're watching TV and messing around on Facebook and kind of listening to a lecture in the background versus the guy who's sitting there actively engaged in a practice question, right? He's getting a lot more out of his time than you probably are with all the distractions that you have around. Again, though, I do understand, obviously, what people are trying to convey by saying 500 to 600 hours. They're saying, look, you need to treat this as a full-time job for 8 to 10 weeks. And that's not necessarily bad advice, but obviously I've seen lots of people who haven't spent that amount of time, people who have full-time jobs or family obligations who couldn't spend that amount of time, who go on to pass the bar exam, and students who can devote their entire life to bar prep for 8 to 10 weeks who obviously fail the bar exam. And obviously there's a ton of factors there. My point is, though, that coming up with a specific amount of time is a tough way to think about it. And really probably the better way, if you want a metric to gauge how much work it's going to take to pass the bar exam, is looking at the amount of practice questions you have to complete and review, the amount of practice multiple choice questions you need to complete and review, and the amount of practice essays that you need to complete and review. And from my experience, if you look at variables within your control during bar prep, variables within your control during bar prep. So that's not something like the law school that you went to, or what your class rank was, or if your English is a second language. All of those are variables that are outside of your control once you begin bar prep. Can't change what law school you went to, what your class rank was, whether or not your English is a second language. Of course, all of these things may have an effect on the big scheme of things when you look at correlation between pass rates. But those are not within your control during bar prep. So let's throw those out for a second and look at, okay, during your 8 to 10 weeks, what can you actually control? And if I look at the variables within your control during bar prep, I would say the highest correlation that I see from passing and failing the bar exam is the amount of practice questions completed and reviewed. And it's really not even close. There's no other variable to me that has such a direct correlation. When students that I've seen do, excessive amounts of practice, and they diligently review their practice and understand why they're getting questions correct and incorrect fully, the results tend to be good. And realistically, I've said it before, I'll say it again, if I had to put specific numbers on it, and again, every situation is different, every person is different, so there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all for everyone. But if I had to put a number on it, once a student has done 2,000 or more practice multiple choice questions and 5 or 6 practice essays from each subject, right? You've diligently reviewed those practice materials, right? You can't just fly through stuff and not review it. That does you no good. You have to understand why you're getting things right and wrong, assuming that you're diligently, critically reviewing your work. If you do that amount of practice, you have exposed yourself to almost anything that could be tested. I mean, at that point, you've done enough practice, you've exposed yourself to a lot of stuff. And bar examiners are creatures of habit. They test the same stuff. You know, if you look at it in the scheme of the bar exam over the last 20 years, right? Rules are tested over and over again. It's more of the same, not a whole lot of variance. So when you do that type of practice, you know, almost every question that's been released and more, you know, you're exposing yourself to so much that it starts to become pretty routine, you know. And when you show up on bar exam day, you're gonna be in such great shape having done that amount of practice, which is why from my experience, I've yet to see somebody go out there and do that type of practice every day where you're doing, you know, 30 or more practice multiple choice questions a day, you know, at least one practice essay a day. But you know, the students are getting out there and doing 2 practice essays a day and, you know, 50, 60, probably 64, right? You want to do 32 question set multiple choice, but doing that type of practice and failing the bar exam is going to be pretty rare. If that does happen, off the top of my head, I can't think of somebody who's done that type of practice and failed. And if it does happen, there has to be something else going on. Because if you do that much practice, when you show up on exam day, you're going to be in such great shape. It's hard for me to envision the scenario where somebody does that and fails. Typically, you know, when we talk about variables within your control, the reason that I see students fail the bar exam is because they didn't do enough practice, right? Especially under timed conditions. I see oftentimes that people go into the bar exam and they've only done like 1 or 2 practice essays under real bar exam conditions. You know, because it's hard, right? During bar prep, you spend, the big bar prep companies have you spend so much time watching video lectures or attending them in person, you know, watching videos and typically oftentimes filling in blanks in an outline, rather than actually sitting down and practicing the materials, which to me, I just have to believe that that's probably not the best way for most people to learn the law. You know, sitting there, filling in blanks in an outline while listening to lectures, in my opinion, is probably not going to be as valuable as sitting down and doing practice questions. Not to say that there's not a time and a place to watch videos and listen to lectures, you know, especially if you haven't really been exposed to a subject before. If you're taking Article 9, Secure Transactions on the multi-state essay exam, and you never took that class in law school, you don't know anything about Article 9, probably will be helpful to watch some lectures and expose yourself, you know, in that area of the law. But not to say that, you know, there's more efficient ways. You could also expose yourself to that by just reading outlines more quickly, you know, an attack outline where you really are efficiently exposing yourselves to the material. But again, to each their own. And some people I know do feel like they get a ton out of lectures. And like I said, everybody's a little bit different. But from my experience, the best thing that you can do is practice. So to take this back, sorry, I'm going on a big tangent there. I just love to talk about practicing for the bar exam, you know, because I feel very strongly that that's by far your best bet. And I always want to convey to students, you need to study less, practice more. I'm just constantly saying it. But really, to go back to our original question in terms of the amount of hours you're going to have to spend studying to pass the bar exam, again, I just think that that's not the correct way to frame the question. You shouldn't be thinking about the hours that you're going to spend. You should be thinking about the amount of practice questions you need to complete and review. Okay, with that, hopefully this has helped you a little bit as you begin bar prep, or if you've already started, you know, to really kind of hopefully change the way you're thinking about it and give you a new goal. You know, not necessarily, you shouldn't be focusing every day on, I need to spend X amount of hours studying today. You should be thinking about, I need to do X amount of practice questions and review them today. And if you do that every day, you're going to be in great shape for the bar exam. With that, I will leave you to it, and I'll see you at our next video.